When I first met Megan, it felt as though the world, which had always seemed a flat and predictable landscape, had suddenly tilted on its axis, revealing a new, exhilarating dimension. She was a meteor, a streak of light and heat and ambition in the quiet, orderly sky of my life. She was everything I thought I wasn't, and everything I secretly wished I could be. I was 26, an IT consultant navigating a world of code and spreadsheets, my days measured in solved tickets and server uptime. My life was a series of logical progressions, of if/then statements. It was a stable, predictable, and, if I was being honest with myself, beige existence. Megan was 24, and her life was a riot of color. She was a firecracker on the fast track to corporate success, a woman who didn't just walk into a room, but conquered it. We met at a networking event, a place so antithetical to my nature that my presence there felt like a cosmic joke. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and lukewarm white wine. I was a statue in the corner, clutching my plastic cup like a life raft, my mind a frantic scramble of overthinking and social anxiety. And then I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the room, head thrown back in a laugh that was loud and genuine and utterly captivating. Her confidence was a physical force, a magnetic field that seemed to bend the light around her. She was a supernova in a room full of dying stars. I must have been staring, my awkwardness a beacon in the sea of practiced nonchalance. Because before I could formulate a single, non-terrifying sentence, she noticed me. She broke away from her conversation, a small, amused smile playing on her lips, and walked directly toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You look," she said, her voice a low, husky drawl that was both intimidating and impossibly alluring. "Like you'd rather be anywhere else on earth right now." I laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to everyone," she grinned. "I'm Megan. Ryan." I managed my voice a little too thin. From that moment, we clicked. It was an improbable, exhilarating connection. Our first date, a stilted coffee that I was sure I had ruined, somehow turned into a second, a long, rambling walk through the city that ended with a kiss under a street lamp that felt like something out of an old movie. Before long, we were inseparable. I, the quiet, logical man of code, and she, the vibrant, ambitious woman of action. We were a paradox, an anomaly, and it felt like fate. The early years of our marriage were a testament to that feeling. They were a whirlwind of shared dreams and tangible accomplishments. We bought a small, charming house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. We adopted a scruffy, one-eyed rescue dog we named Bailey, whose crooked grin seemed to mirror our own goofy happiness. We built a life that felt solid, secure, a fortress against the uncertainties of the world. Megan was my rock, and I was hers. Or so I believed. She would come home from work, her eyes blazing with the fire of a battle won, and regale me with stories of her latest project, of a client she had outsmarted, of a deal she had closed. I would listen, mesmerized, not by the corporate jargon, but by her drive, her passion, her unshakable belief in her own abilities. She made me believe that together, we could conquer anything. She was the star, and I was her quiet, devoted astronomer, content to chart her brilliant trajectory across the sky. But somewhere along the way, in the slow, imperceptible creep of time, the trajectory began to shift. The constellations realigned. It started so subtly, I almost didn't notice it. A slow, tectonic drift. Megan's job at a new firm, a prestigious corporate powerhouse called Ascend, began to demand more of her. Much more. The late nights, once an occasional necessity, became the norm. The weekends that we used to spend hiking with Bailey or binge-watching old shows on the couch became marathon work sessions, with Megan hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen casting long shadows on her face. "I'm sorry, babe," she'd say, her eyes apologetic but her voice resolute. "It's just for now. Once I get through this project, things will calm down. I promise." But, for now, was a horizon that kept receding. It stretched from weeks into months, and from months into years. I told myself it was normal. This was the price of success, the sacrifice required to climb the corporate ladder. I wanted to be the supportive husband. I wanted to be the man who cheered her on from the sidelines, who had a hot meal and a sympathetic ear waiting for her when she finally came home. But as her career soared into the stratosphere, I couldn't help but feel like I was being left behind, a spectator on the ground watching her disappear into the clouds. The distance between us was no longer just physical, it was atmospheric. And then there was Alex. At first, he was just a name, a disembodied character in the narrative of her work life. Her new boss, the visionary leader of Ascend. Someone she admired for his sharp mind, his ruthless efficiency, his preternatural ability to command a room. Alex is a genius, she'd say, her voice filled with a genuine, almost reverential admiration. He makes the most complex problems look so effortless. It's like watching a chess grandmaster. I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a mentor, a figure they look up to. It was healthy. It was professional. But as time went on, Alex evolved from a passing mention into a recurring character, and then into a central figure in our lives, an invisible third party in our marriage. Megan would come home, her conversation buzzing not with her own accomplishments, but with his. Alex's strategies. Alex's jokes. Alex's advice. At first, it sounded professional. But there was a new spark in her eyes when she spoke of him, a different kind of energy that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was the same fire she used to have when she talked about us. The late nights started to weigh on me more heavily. Dinners grew cold on the table. Plans were canceled with a last-minute text. "Don't wait up," she'd write, leaving me to eat alone, the silence of the house a roaring companion. When I'd bring it up, gently at first, she'd wave it off with an impatient sigh. "It's work, Ryan. You know how demanding it is." And I did. But knowing didn't make the loneliness any easier. The cracks in our marriage, once hairline fractures, were growing wider with every missed dinner, every canceled plan, every moment she chose her work over us. I started to notice other things. The way she got ready for work, her attention to detail sharper, more meticulous than it used to be. The perfect hair, the flawless makeup, the clothes that seemed more tailored, more intentional, less for a day at the office and more for an audience. One evening, I made a comment about it, trying to sound casual, trying to pretend my heart wasn't a cold, hard knot in my chest. "New dress?" I asked. "Just something for work," she replied, her back to me, brushing it off as if it were nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel the distance between us like a physical presence, a cold shadow creeping into every corner of the life we had built. Looking back now, through the clear, cruel lens of hindsight, I wonder if I saw it all coming. The missed dinners, the guarded phone habits, the way her face would light up when she spoke his name. The evidence was all there, a slow, painful unraveling of the life we had so carefully woven together. But denial is a powerful anesthetic. I wanted to believe that we were still the couple who could conquer anything. I wanted to believe that these were just temporary cracks in a solid foundation, that we would find our way back to each other. I didn't realize then that she wasn't lost. She was just walking away. The first time Megan mentioned Alex, it was with the innocent reverence of a student speaking of a great teacher. She came home one evening, kicked off her heels with a weary sigh, and launched into a story about a particularly grueling team meeting. "My new boss, Alex," she said, her tone filled with a genuine, unadulterated admiration. "He has this way of explaining things. He just cuts through all the noise and makes everything seem so simple, even when the client is being deliberately impossible. It's like magic." I smiled and nodded, half listening as I chopped vegetables for dinner. I didn't think much of it. In every career, there's that one boss, that one mentor, who seems larger than life, who possesses a kind of professional mystique. I figured Alex was just that for Megan, a source of inspiration. But what started as casual, admiring mentions quickly turned into something more. Alex, she told me, was 42, divorced, and possessed a mind like a steel trap and an even sharper wardrobe. He had built Ascend from the ground up, transforming a small, scrappy startup into a corporate powerhouse. She admired his ambition, his confidence, his seemingly effortless ability to take control of any situation. At first, I tried to share in her enthusiasm. "Sounds like a good guy to learn from," I said one evening, as she recounted another story of Alex's brilliance in handling a tricky client negotiation. But as the weeks turned into months, Alex's name began to dominate our conversations. It wasn't just his work ethic anymore. It was his charisma, his charm, The way he always knew the right thing to say, the right joke to tell to defuse a tense situation. Alex suggested I take a bigger role on the Henderson project, she'd say, her eyes lighting up with an excitement I hadn't seen in a while. Or, Alex thinks I have real potential to move up in the company. He sees something in me. I wanted to be supportive. I truly did. But a small, nagging unease began to take root in the back of my mind. The way she talked about him, it was different. It wasn't just professional admiration. It was personal. The first real red flag, the one that I couldn't rationalize away, came when the nature of her work events began to change. The networking mixers and client dinners, which I had often attended with her, were suddenly replaced by more exclusive, team-only gatherings. "This one's just for the team," she said one evening, as she slipped on a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before. "You'd be bored to tears. Just a bunch of boring work talk." I frowned, a knot tightening in my stomach. "I don't mind. I like meeting your coworkers." She hesitated, her hands busy adjusting her earrings, her eyes avoiding mine in the reflection of the bedroom mirror. It's more casual, you know? A chance for the team to unwind. I don't want you to feel out of place." It felt like a flimsy excuse, a polite and well-constructed wall. But I didn't press her. I trusted her. Or, more accurately, I wanted to trust her. I chose to believe her. Then came the nights when she'd come home late, well past midnight, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. Not her perfume, but something else. A rich, masculine scent of sandalwood and leather. "Long night?" I asked once, trying to keep my tone light, casual, trying to pretend the question wasn't a lead weight in my gut. She nodded, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter with a thud of exhaustion. Dinner ran way over. Alex insisted we go over the final presentation one last time before tomorrow's big pitch. I forced a smile. "Well, I'm sure you'll kill it." But I didn't say anything about the cologne. I didn't ask why a final presentation review required a scent that lingered in the air long after she had gone upstairs to bed. The turning point, the moment my nagging unease metastasized into a full-blown, sickening certainty, came during one of our rare, quiet evenings together. We were sitting on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine, the television playing some mindless show in the background. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, a perfect forgery of the life we used to have. I noticed her scrolling through her phone, a small, private smile playing on her lips. It was a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. "What's so funny?" I asked, leaning over, trying to peek at the screen. She quickly locked the phone and set it aside, the smile vanishing. "Oh, just a funny email from Alex. He has the weirdest sense of humor." The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard fist. "You seem to talk about him a lot," I said, my voice carefully neutral, a feat of immense self-control. She shrugged, taking a sip of her wine. "He's my boss, Ryan. We work closely together. It's normal." Normal. The word tasted like a lie. The way her face lit up when his name appeared on her screen. The way her voice changed when she spoke of him. The way she was now building a wall of excuses and dismissals around their relationship. "You're being paranoid," she said, her tone suddenly sharp, defensive. "Alex is just a colleague. A mentor. You have nothing to worry about." But I did worry. I worried because my wife was drifting away from me, pulled into the orbit of another man's charisma. I worried because the foundations of our marriage, which I had believed to be bedrock, were beginning to feel like sand. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, no matter how much I wanted to believe her, the nagging feeling in my gut, the primal instinct of a man losing his partner, refused to go away. It was a low, persistent alarm, and it was getting louder every day. Red flags have a funny way of creeping into your life. At first, they are subtle, whispers in the wind, small anomalies you can easily dismiss. A change in routine, a new perfume. But eventually, they pile up, one on top of the other, until they form a barrier so high you can no longer see the horizon you thought you were walking toward. For me, it started with Megan's appearance. She had always been a beautiful woman, someone who took pride in looking put together. But this was different. This wasn't about pride, it was about performance. Her casual, comfortable work outfits were systematically replaced by a new wardrobe of sleek, tailored dresses and sharp, form-fitting blouses. Her makeup, once a minimalist touch, became more precise, more dramatic. There was a new, alluring perfume, a complex scent of jasmine and musk that replaced the light, floral one she had worn for years. It was a scent designed to be noticed. One morning, as she stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting a new, delicate gold necklace, I commented on it. She looked polished, hardened, like a beautiful, expensive weapon. "Big meeting today?" I asked, sipping my coffee, trying to inject a note of casual admiration into my voice. She smiled at her own reflection, a small, self-satisfied smile. "Not really. Just felt like dressing up." That wasn't the Megan I knew. The Megan I knew was practical, efficient. She didn't fuss over appearances unless there was a reason, a specific audience she was trying to impress. "You've been dressing up a lot lately," I said, unable to stop myself. She finally turned to look at me, her eyebrow raised in a perfect, questioning arch. "Is that a problem?" "No," I said quickly, backing down. "You look great. Just noticing." She shrugged, a gesture of cool dismissal, and went back to fixing her hair. But the seed of doubt, which had been a small, nagging thing, had now sprouted. Then there were the phone calls. I'd walk into a room, and she would be on the phone, her voice different. Lighter. More playful. A voice I hadn't heard her use with me in years. "Stop it, Alex," she said once, a soft, musical laugh in her voice. "You're terrible." She didn't see me standing in the doorway, but I saw her. The way she was idly twirling a strand of her hair, the way her lips were curved in a flirtatious, unguarded smile. It was a gut punch. When I asked her about it later, she brushed it off with a roll of her eyes. "That's just how Alex is. He jokes around with everyone. Honestly, Ryan, don't overthink it." But I was overthinking everything. I was an analyst, a man who looked for patterns in the data. And the data was pointing to a conclusion I didn't want to accept. My friends began to notice. Liam, my best friend since college, a man whose blunt honesty was both a comfort and a curse, was the first to call it out. We were at a bar, watching a game, the comfortable silence between us stretching on a little too long. "You okay, man?" he asked, his eyes on the screen, but his question directed at me. I hesitated, swirling the beer in my glass. I wasn't sure how much to share, how to give voice to the formless, ugly suspicion in my mind. "Things are complicated." Liam nodded knowingly. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "It's Megan, isn't it? And this Alex guy she's always talking about." I looked up, surprised. "What makes you say that?" He leaned back in his chair, taking a long drink of his beer. "Because I've seen the way you get quiet when his name comes up. And I saw them, at that fundraiser thing a few weeks ago. The way he looks at her. That's not a boss looking at an employee." He leaned forward, his voice low. "You don't want to be the guy who misses what's happening right under his nose, Ryan. Pay attention." His words were a cold splash of water, a brutal validation of my own fears. But not everyone saw it that way. Megan's sister, Rachel, was her staunchest defender. During a tense family dinner, I made a passing, sarcastic comment about the amount of time Megan was spending with her boss. Rachel immediately jumped to her defense. "You're being ridiculous, Ryan," she said, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Megan loves her job. She's ambitious. Just because she has a good working relationship with her boss doesn't mean there's something going on. Frankly, you're being insecure." The word insecure stung. Was that all this was? Was I so threatened by my wife's success, by her relationship with a powerful mentor, that I was inventing a betrayal that wasn't there? The breaking point, the moment my denial finally crumbled, came at the annual Ascend corporate gala. Megan had insisted I attend. "It'll be fun," she'd said, flashing me a bright, unconvincing smile. "You'll get to meet the team, see what I've been working on." The event was a lavish, ostentatious affair, held in a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers and a sea of perfectly dressed, aggressively confident professionals. Megan was in her element. She looked stunning in a floor-length, sapphire blue gown, her confidence radiating as she moved through the crowd, a queen holding court. During her speech, a presentation on a major project she had led, she commanded the room, her voice steady and poised. For a moment, watching her up there, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. But that pride quickly soured. I noticed Alex standing off to the side, watching her. He wasn't just listening to her words. He was staring at her with an intensity that was proprietary, possessive. It was the kind of stare that made my blood run cold. His eyes lingered on her, on the curve of her neck, the line of her back, as if she were the only person in the room. And Megan? Megan seemed to bask in it. She would occasionally flick her eyes in his direction, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It was a silent, intimate conversation happening in plain sight. When she finished her speech and the crowd erupted in applause, Alex was the first to approach her. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was far too familiar, far too intimate for a boss. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She laughed, that same light, musical laugh I had heard on the phone, and leaned into his touch, just for a second. My gut churned. The entire room seemed to fade away. There was only the three of us, caught in a toxic, triangular spotlight. That night, as we drove home in a tense, suffocating silence, I couldn't keep it in any longer. Alex couldn't take his eyes off you during your speech, I said, my voice a strained, failed attempt at casualness. Megan glanced at me, her expression unreadable in the flashing lights of the highway. He's my boss, Ryan. He was just being supportive. Supportive, I echoed, the word tasting like poison. Is that what you call it? The way he was undressing you with his eyes in front of 200 people. You're reading too much into this, she said, her tone suddenly sharp, defensive. Alex respects me. That's it. But I wasn't convinced. The red flags were no longer subtle whispers. They were glaring, screaming sirens. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it, no matter how much I wanted to believe her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental, something precious, was slipping away, just beyond my reach. I was losing her, and I was terrified she was already gone. The argument began, as most of our recent ones did, over dinner. It was a quiet evening, one of the rare nights she was home at a reasonable hour, but the air between us was heavy, thick with unspoken resentments. Megan was scrolling through her phone, a faint, detached smile on her face, while I pushed my cooling food around my plate, my appetite gone, my mind a frantic battlefield. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I couldn't take the pretense. Megan, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. I set my fork down with a deliberate, sharp clink. We need to talk. She barely looked up from her screen. What's wrong now? The casual, weary dismissal stung, but I pressed on. It's about Alex. Her eyes finally flicked to mine, her thumb freezing on the screen. They narrowed slightly. What about him? I hesitated, searching for the right words, the calm, rational words of a concerned husband. But they wouldn't come. Frustration won out. You think I don't see it? I said, my voice rising, gaining a momentum I couldn't control. The way he looks at you? The way he undresses you with his eyes every chance he gets? The hand on your back at the gala? You think I'm blind? She froze for a moment, her phone hovering above the table. Then she let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Are you serious right now, Ryan? You're still on that? Yes, I'm serious, I said, my voice now shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. You might think it's harmless, but it's not. He's crossing boundaries, and you're letting him. You're encouraging him. Her expression hardened, her features setting like concrete. Alex is my boss. He respects me and my work. Just because you're insecure about my success doesn't mean there's something inappropriate going on. The word insecure was a match to a gasoline-soaked rag. Insecure. I shot back, my anger bubbling over, hot and acidic. This has nothing to do with insecurity and everything to do with the fact that you are letting another man, your boss, get far too close. And worse, you seem to enjoy it. Her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor as she stood, glaring down at me, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. You think I enjoy it? She said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. Fine. Watch closely, Ryan, because I'm about to make it obvious. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, stunned into silence by her audacity, by the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of her challenge. Are you listening to yourself right now? I finally managed, my voice trembling. Are you? She countered, crossing her arms, a general surveying a battlefield she was determined to win. All you ever do is criticize. You don't support me. You don't understand my career. And now you're accusing me of something that doesn't even exist, all because of your own pathetic jealousy. This isn't about your career, Megan. It's about our marriage. It's about respect. It's about the fact that my wife comes home smelling like another man's cologne. The words were out before I could stop them, a raw, primal scream of pain. She scoffed, rolling her eyes with theatrical disdain. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic. You've been distant for months, Ryan, buried in your own little world. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need to rely on someone else for validation. Her words cut deep, a masterful deflection that twisted the blame back onto me. But I refused to let her win, refused to let her paint me as the villain in this sordid play. You're playing with fire, Megan, I said, my tone low and controlled, a stark contrast to the inferno raging inside me. And I'm telling you right now, I'm gone before the music stops. She blinked, her confidence faltering for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of uncertainty in her cold eyes. What's that supposed to mean? It means I will not sit here and watch you burn down everything we've built, I said, my voice shaking with a final, desperate resolve. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. You've made your priorities clear, and they don't include me. Or us. Ryan, don't, she started, her voice losing its hard edge, replaced by a note of something that might have been panic. But I cut her off. No, Megan, I've done enough waiting, enough hoping, enough pretending that this is normal. I opened the front door, the cool night air a shock to my system. If Alex is what you want, then fine. But don't expect me to stick around and applaud. Without waiting for her response, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the quiet suburban street, a definitive, final punctuation mark on a 20-year conversation. I sat in my car, the engine silent, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, a cold, heavy dread. My chest heaved with a mixture of anger and a heartbreak, so profound it felt like a physical wound. I had always imagined that if our marriage ever came to this, to a moment of such catastrophic failure, I would feel some sense of closure, of clarity. But all I felt was a hollow, gnawing ache. A terrifying realization that the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built a life with, had become a stranger. The weight of her words, asterisk then watch closely asterisk, hung in the air like a cruel, taunting echo. I didn't know what came next, but as I finally turned the key and the engine roared to life, I made a silent, solemn vow to myself. I would not let her disrespect our marriage, our history, our love, any longer. I would fight for my dignity, for my peace of mind, even if it meant walking away from the only life I had ever known. Liam didn't ask any questions when I showed up on his doorstep at 10 o'clock at night. A single duffel bag slung over my shoulder and a look on my face that probably screamed shipwreck. That was the beauty of our friendship, a 20-year bond forged in college dorm rooms and cemented over countless beers and shared crises. He had an innate ability to read the room, to know when to push and when to just let things be. Spare room's yours, he said simply, stepping aside to let me in. He clapped me on the shoulder, a solid, reassuring gesture. Beers are in the fridge. Talk when you're ready. I nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over me. I walked into the familiar, comfortable chaos of his bachelor pad, the weight of the last few days, the last few months, pressing down on me like a physical force. The first few nights at Liam's were a blur of sleeplessness and a gnawing, hollow ache. I'd lie awake on the surprisingly comfortable mattress in his guest room, staring at the unfamiliar patterns the streetlights cast on the ceiling. I replayed the argument with Megan in my mind, a masochistic loop of her words, her expressions, her cold, dismissive anger. Then watch closely, because I'm about to make it obvious. Asterisk. The words haunted me. Were they just a threat, a desperate, angry lashing out in the heat of the moment? Or were they a promise? A declaration of intent? Was she trying to hurt me? Or had she truly lost sight of the line between right and wrong, between her ambition and our marriage? Either way, it felt like a betrayal I couldn't ignore, a gauntlet thrown down that I had no choice but to accept. During the day, I threw myself into my work with a frantic, obsessive energy. I stayed late at the office, losing myself in the clean, logical world of code and data, anything to avoid the quiet, unstructured moments where my thoughts would inevitably creep in, dark and unwelcome. Liam, ever the supportive friend, tried to pull me out of my head. You need to talk to someone about this, man, he said one evening, sliding a cold beer across his kitchen island towards me. I'm talking to you, I said, attempting a weak, unconvincing smile. He shook his head, his expression serious. I mean a professional. A therapist. Someone who knows what they're doing. You can't keep carrying this alone, Ryan. It'll eat you alive. I resisted at first. The idea of spilling my guts to a stranger felt clinical, humiliating. But Liam's words, as they often did, sank in. I needed help. I needed a guide to navigate the tangled, overgrown mess that my life had become. Therapy was a strange, disorienting experience at first. Sitting in the quiet, tastefully decorated office of Dr. Wilson, a woman with kind eyes and a calm, unwavering gaze, I wasn't sure where to begin. How do you condense years of love, resentment, and a slow, creeping heartbreak into a single, coherent narrative? Start with how you're feeling right now, she said gently, as if sensing my hesitation. I took a deep breath, and I began to talk. I talked about Megan, about Alex, about the pride I felt in her ambition and the loneliness it had created. I talked about the missed dinners, the cologne, the gala. I talked about the argument, the final, devastating conversation that had led me to Liam's spare room. As the sessions went on, I found myself uncovering layers of emotion I hadn't even known were there. It wasn't just anger. It was grief. It was fear. It was a profound sense of loss, not just for my wife, but for the future I thought we were building together. She prioritized him over us. I said during one session, my voice tinged with a raw, bitter frustration. I thought we were a team. I thought we were building a life together. But maybe I was the only one who still cared about the blueprints. Dr. Wilson leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. Do you think Megan values your marriage as much as you do, Ryan? Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. The truth was, I didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty, that gnawing, hollow doubt, hurt more than anything else. While I was working to process my own emotions, Megan, it seemed, was facing her own fallout. I heard through mutual friends, through the inevitable gossip that trickled back to me, that Alex hadn't wasted any time taking advantage of my absence. He invited her to a strategy dinner the night after you left. Kate, a friend of ours, told me over a hushed phone call. He's laying it on thick. The charm, the mentorship, the promises of a fast track to partnership. It seemed Megan had underestimated his intentions, or perhaps had been willfully blind to them. Part of me, a dark, vengeful part, wanted to feel a grim satisfaction, a sense of vindication. I told you so, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the brilliant, ambitious, loving woman I had married, felt a deep, aching pity. She had let herself be swept up in his charisma, in the intoxicating allure of his power and approval, and now, it seemed, she was beginning to pay the price. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a strange sense of clarity. The physical distance from the house, the emotional space provided by therapy and Liam's unwavering support, gave me the perspective I needed. Megan had made her choices, and so had I. While I couldn't control her actions, I could control my own. I was done waiting for her to realize my worth. It was time to prioritize myself, for once. The next time Liam asked how I was doing, I gave him an honest answer. I'm not okay, I said, but I'm getting there. He nodded, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. That's all you can do, man. One step at a time. And for the first time in weeks, in months, I felt a genuine glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I would come out of this fire stronger. When word of our separation started to spread, it was like a small, controlled explosion that sent shockwaves through our carefully constructed social circle. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. My marriage, a private, intimate thing, had become public property, a topic for debate and dissection over dinner parties and coffee dates. I was living under a microscope, and the scrutiny was exhausting. Liam, as always, was firmly in my corner. He was a bulwark against the tide of unsolicited advice and veiled judgments. You did the right thing, man, he said one evening, as we sat on his back porch, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Megan crossed a line, a big one, and you stood up for yourself. That's not something to feel guilty about. I nodded, taking a long drink of my beer, appreciating his unwavering, uncomplicated support. Liam wasn't the type to sugarcoat things, and hearing him validate my feelings was a small, but significant comfort in the chaos. But not everyone saw things the same way. The battle lines were being drawn, and I found myself on one side, with Megan on the other, and our friends and family caught in the crossfire. Rachel, Megan's sister, called me a week after I'd moved out, her voice a clipped, icy weapon. "Ryan," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "What are you doing? You and Megan have been together for over a decade. You don't just walk away from that." "It's not that simple, Rachel," I replied, my own voice tight with a frustration I was struggling to contain. "Megan made choices. Choices that hurt our marriage. I needed space." She let out a frustrated sigh, a sound of pure, sisterly loyalty. "She's been under a lot of pressure at work. And Alex, well, he's just a part of that environment. You're reading too much into this. You're being insecure." The word was a hot poker to an open wound. "Am I?" I countered, my voice dangerously low. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she prioritized her boss over her husband. It looks like she chose her career over our life. That's not insecurity, Rachel. That's a fact. That's not fair," she snapped. "Megan loves you. She made a mistake. A mistake she hasn't taken responsibility for," I said firmly. "A mistake she dared me to watch her make. I can't keep pretending everything is fine, Rachel. It's not." The conversation ended on a tense, unresolved note, with Rachel insisting that I was overreacting and me standing my ground. The divide wasn't limited to family. Our mutual friends, people we had known for years, quickly began taking sides, their opinions adding another layer of complexity to an already messy situation. "You can't just leave her, Ryan," said Kate, a friend we'd known since our newlywed days. We were at a group dinner, an awkward, tense affair where everyone was trying to pretend things were normal. Marriage is about fighting for each other. Even when things get tough, you have to be willing to do the work. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the tide of angry words that threatened to spill out. "I fought, Kate," I said, my voice low and strained. "I've been fighting for years. I've been the supportive husband, the one waiting at home, the one cheering from the sidelines. But it takes two people to make a marriage work, and Megan hasn't been on the team for a long time." Kate gave me a skeptical, pitying look, but she didn't push further. On the other hand, some of our friends were less forgiving of Megan's actions. Greg, another old friend, cornered me by the bar later that evening. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. "She spent all her time with this Alex guy, let him cross all sorts of boundaries, and then, when you called her on it, she basically dared you to watch her cheat? You did the right thing, man. You had to walk away." Hearing their support helped, but it didn't erase the sting of feeling like my marriage had become a public spectacle, a piece of gossip to be picked apart and analyzed. Meanwhile, Megan was dealing with her own fallout. Rachel, in one of her less accusatory, more informative phone calls, let it slip that the whispers about her relationship with Alex were beginning to circulate at work. "People are starting to talk," Rachel confided, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "Some of her coworkers think she's too close to Alex, that she's getting special treatment. It's making things awkward for her." I couldn't say I was surprised. Alex wasn't exactly a subtle man, and Megan's involvement with him, whether she saw it as innocent or not, hadn't gone unnoticed. "She brought this on herself, Rachel," I said, my tone colder than I intended. "You're not being fair, Ryan," she sighed. "She's struggling. So am I shot back. But I didn't create this mess." The divide in our social circle only deepened as time went on. Some friends started to avoid us altogether, unwilling to pick a side in the Cold War that had erupted. Others tried to play peacemaker, suggesting counseling, mediation, a weekend away. "You don't have to let this be the end," Kate said during one such conversation, her voice full of a pleading, earnest hope. But it already felt like the end to me. The trust, the very bedrock of our relationship, had been systematically eroded, and without it, there was no foundation left to rebuild on. Through it all, Liam remained my rock. "People are going to talk," he said one night, his voice steady and reassuring. "They're going to have opinions. They're going to take sides. Let them. You know the truth. And that's all that matters." He was right, of course. The opinions of others, no matter how well-intentioned or how misguided, didn't change the fundamental facts of what had happened. They didn't change the pain, the betrayal, or the hard choices that now lay before me. This was my life, my marriage, my heartbreak. And I had to decide how to move forward, regardless of what anyone else thought. When I moved out, I thought I'd be severing myself from the drama, from Megan's increasingly tangled web with Alex. I envisioned a clean break, a quiet space where I could lick my wounds and begin the slow, arduous process of healing. But life, I was learning, rarely offers such clean amputations. The threads of a shared past are stubborn, and they have a way of pulling you back into the chaos, whether you want to be there or not. The first hint that I was still connected to the fallout came from a mutual acquaintance, a man named Mark who worked in a different department at Ascend. We bumped into each other at a local coffee shop, a chance encounter that felt fated. After a few minutes of awkward pleasantries, the conversation inevitably turned toward Megan. "Heard you two are going through some things," Mark said cautiously, his tone laced with a mixture of curiosity and what seemed like genuine concern. "Yeah," I replied, my voice non-committal, not wanting to dive into the messy details with a near stranger. "Things haven't been great." Mark hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop as if to make sure no one was listening. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I don't want to overstep, but I think you should know. Alex isn't as squeaky clean as he makes himself out to be." My grip tightened around my coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "He has a reputation," Mark said, his eyes serious. "A pattern. He finds someone bright, ambitious, usually a woman. He charms them, mentors them, makes them feel like they're the center of his professional universe. He crosses boundaries, blurs the lines. And then, when he gets what he wants, or when they push back, he leaves them to deal with the fallout. A few people at the office have already raised concerns with HR, but he's got enough influence, enough power, to keep things quiet." Hearing this wasn't surprising. It confirmed every suspicion I'd had for months. But it still felt like a punch to the gut. Alex wasn't just a charming, inappropriate boss. He was a predator. A corporate predator who used his power and charisma as weapons. And my wife, my brilliant, ambitious wife, had walked right into his crosshairs. I muttered a quick thanks to Mark and left the coffee shop, a new, more sinister storm brewing in my head. Meanwhile, Megan was beginning to experience Alex's true nature firsthand. From what I gathered through Rachel, who was still determined to play the role of reluctant mediator, Alex had started pushing boundaries in ways even Megan could no longer ignore or rationalize. "He's been inviting her to these private strategy dinners at his condo," Rachel said during one of her calls, her voice filled with a genuine, sisterly concern. "He's dropping hints about how much he's helped her career, about how he could do even more for her, if she's willing to be flexible." I clenched my jaw, a familiar, hot anger bubbling to the surface. And she's still going along with it. "She feels trapped, Ryan," Rachel admitted, her voice defensive. "She knows it looks bad. She knows it's inappropriate. But she's afraid to push back. She thinks it will ruin her career. He's made it very clear that he holds her future in his hands." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell Rachel that Megan was the one who had given him that power, the one who had let it get this far. But I bit my tongue. Liam, ever the voice of blunt, pragmatic reason, had a different take. "You need to talk to her," he said, when I recounted the conversation. I shot him a skeptical look. "And say what? I told you so." "No," he clarified, his expression serious. "Not to get back together. Not to forgive her. But to give her a reality check. She's caught in his web. She needs to see Alex for the predator he is, and maybe, just maybe, hearing it from you, from the outside, will actually make her listen." I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Part of me, the wounded, angry part, wanted to wash my hands of the entire situation, to let Megan deal with the consequences of her choices on her own. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had married, the partner I had loved, felt a reluctant, nagging sense of duty. The opportunity came a few days later when Megan called, her voice hesitant and unsure on the other end of the line. "Ryan," she began. Can we talk? In person?" I agreed, my own curiosity warring with my resentment. We met at a quiet, neutral park, a place with no shared history, no ghosts. She looked different, more tired, more subdued. The confident, polished armor she had worn for months was gone, replaced by a fragile, vulnerable uncertainty. "What's on your mind, Megan?" I asked, keeping my tone even, my emotions carefully locked away. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on her own hands, which were twisting a tissue into a shredded mess. I think I made a mistake, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Which one? I asked, unable to keep the sharp, bitter edge out of my voice. She flinched, but she pressed on. Alex. He's been making me uncomfortable. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. At first, I thought it was just his personality, his way of doing business. But now it feels like he's using his position to get what he wants. And you're just realizing this now? I said, the frustration spilling out, hot and uncontrolled. Megan, I've been telling you for months that this guy doesn't respect boundaries. That he's not just a mentor. You didn't listen. I know, she said quietly, her eyes downcast, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was in control. But now, I don't know what to do. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing myself to stay calm, to heed Liam's advice. This wasn't about my anger anymore. This was about giving her the brutal, unvarnished truth she so desperately needed to hear. You need to see Alex for what he is, Megan, I said, my voice softening slightly, becoming firm but not cruel. He's a manipulative predator. He preys on ambitious people like you. He builds you up, makes you feel special, makes you feel dependent on him. And then he uses that dependency to control you. If you don't push back now, if you don't draw a hard, unequivocal line, he will keep taking from you until there is nothing left. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but I didn't let myself soften further. This isn't just about your career anymore, Megan, I continued. This is about your self-respect. If you don't stand up to him, no one else will. You have to save yourself. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm scared, Ryan. I know, I said, and for the first time, a genuine, uncomplicated pang of empathy hit me. But you're stronger than you think. You just have to start believing it. As I walked away from her that day, leaving her alone on the park bench, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief that she was finally seeing the truth. There was a lingering anger that it had taken her this long, that our marriage had to be the casualty of her education. But most of all, there was a strange, quiet sense of closure. Whatever came next was up to her. I had said my piece. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly start moving on. The coffee shop was quiet, the air thick with the scent of dark roast and the soft, ambient hiss of the espresso machine. It was a neutral space, a demilitarized zone. I sat at a small corner table, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug, trying to steady the frantic, chaotic symphony of thoughts and emotions in my head. Megan had asked to meet, and though every rational part of my brain had screamed no, I had agreed. I told myself it was for closure. But if I was being honest, it was curiosity. I wanted to see, with my own eyes, the woman she had become in the wake of her self-inflicted storm. She walked in a few minutes later, and the transformation was jarring. The confident, polished power player was gone. The woman who slid into the seat across from me was smaller, somehow. Her shoulders were hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. Her usually flawless makeup was minimal, and it failed to hide the dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. There was a hesitation in her step, a fragility in her movements that I hadn't seen since the earliest days of our relationship. Ryan, she said, her voice soft, tentative. Megan, I replied, my own tone even, a carefully constructed wall of neutrality. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid a welcome shock to my system. I waited for her to speak. She fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, her eyes darting around the room before finally, reluctantly, settling on me. Thank you for meeting me, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I just nodded, giving her nothing, forcing her to continue. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said, her words slow, deliberate, as if she were navigating a minefield. About us. About everything. Have you? I asked, the skepticism in my voice a palpable thing. She flinched, but she pressed on. I know I messed up, Ryan. I know I let things with Alex get out of hand. And now, she paused, her voice cracking, her composure finally beginning to crumble. Now, I don't even recognize myself. I leaned back in my chair, studying her, an entomologist examining a strange new specimen. What happened, Megan? She swallowed hard, her hands clasped so tightly together on the table that her knuckles were white. Alex, he started making explicit advances. At first, it was just the little things. The comments, the touches that I told myself were harmless. But then, he started outright suggesting things, Ryan. Private strategy meetings at his condo. Weekend, work trips to wine country. He was implying, very clearly, that my future at the company, my career, depended on it. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because it surprised me. I had seen this coming for months. But because hearing the sordid details from her own lips made it real, visceral. And you're just now realizing who he is? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended, the old anger flaring up, hot and familiar. I thought I could handle it, she said, fresh tears pooling in her eyes. I thought I could play the game, keep it professional, use his interest to my advantage. But he's manipulative, Ryan. And I let myself get pulled into his orbit. I let myself believe the things he said about me, about my potential. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh, shaking my head. You didn't just get pulled in, Megan. You walked right into it. You let him into our lives. You let him into our marriage. You chose his validation over my love. Her tears began to fall freely now, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. I know, she said, her voice a trembling, broken thing. I know I hurt you, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her confession, of our shared, broken history, settling between us like a shroud. Finally, I leaned forward, my gaze steady, my voice firm. Megan, you made your choices. And those choices broke us. Trust isn't something you can just patch up with apologies and tears. It takes years to build, and you destroyed it in a matter of seconds, over and over again. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know you are, I said, and for the first time, my tone softened, not with forgiveness, but with a final, weary acceptance. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I even mattered to you anymore. It doesn't fix the foundation you shattered. Her shoulders shook as she cried, and for a fleeting, phantom moment, I felt a pang of the old, protective instinct I used to have for her. But it was just a ghost. It wasn't enough to change my resolve. I needed to hear this, I said finally, standing up, placing a few bills on the table to cover our coffee. And maybe you needed to say it. But this doesn't change where we are. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, a desperate, pleading hope in her eyes. So this is it. It's really over. It was over the moment you let Alex take up more space in your life than I did. I said, my voice steady, but firm. I looked at the broken woman in front of me, a stranger I had once known better than myself. I hope you figure out who you are, Megan. I truly do. But I can't be a part of this anymore. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the cool air hitting my face as I stepped outside. I didn't look back. As I stood by my car, I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling a strange and profound mix of emotions. There was anger. There was a deep, lingering sadness. But most of all, there was closure. For months, I had been searching for answers, for some rational explanation that would make sense of the senseless. And while Megan's confession didn't erase the pain, it gave me a final, terrible clarity. She was human, flawed, and lost in her own ambition. But that didn't excuse what she had done, and it didn't mean I owed her another chance. Driving away from that coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in a very long time. The road ahead was still uncertain, still lonely. But for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine to navigate. The story of us was over. It was time to start writing the story of me. It didn't take long for Alex to show his true colors. The fallout was swift, brutal, and, from what I could gather, entirely predictable. Megan's call came late one evening, about a week after our meeting at the coffee shop. Her voice was shaking, not with sadness this time, but with a raw, panicked mixture of frustration and fear. Ryan? I don't know who else to talk to, she said, the vulnerability in her tone so stark it caught me off guard. I hesitated, a war raging within me. The instinct to hang up, to protect my own hard-won peace, was strong. But a deeper, older instinct, the residual echo of a man who had once promised to be there for her, won out. What's going on, Megan? It's Alex, she began, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. He's turned against me. Ever since I rejected him. He's been shutting me out. excluding me from meetings, pulling me off projects he knows I care about. He's spreading lies, Ryan, telling people I'm unreliable, that my work ethic has slipped. I don't know what to do. A grim, cold sense of satisfaction washed over me. This was it. This was the inevitable consequence of playing with fire. This was the man she had chosen, in all his vindictive glory. But beneath the satisfaction, there was another emotion, a twinge of something that felt uncomfortably like pity. What did you expect, Megan? I said finally, my tone even, detached. You let him manipulate you for months. You were a pawn in his game. Now that you're no longer a useful piece, he's sweeping you off the board. She let out a shaky, desperate breath. I know I made mistakes, Ryan. I know I let him get too close. But I never thought. I didn't think he could be this cruel. Over the next few weeks, I heard more bits and pieces about her situation, mostly through Rachel, who seemed to have appointed herself the reluctant chronicler of her sister's downfall. Alex, it seemed, had gone from charming mentor to ruthless adversary with terrifying speed. He was wielding his power like a bludgeon, systematically dismantling the career and reputation Megan had worked so hard to build. He's telling people she's difficult to work with, Rachel confided during one of her calls, her own voice strained with a helpless anger. That she's emotionally unstable. That her success was all because of his guidance. And now that he's pulled back, she's floundering. He's rewriting history, Ryan. He's erasing her. It was a cruel, poetic twist of fate. The very man she had admired for his ability to control narratives was now using that skill to destroy hers. Megan reached out to me one last time, in person. She showed up at Liam's house one evening, unannounced. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The vibrant, confident woman I had known completely gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost, broken, and utterly defeated. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, a silent, unmovable barrier. What do you want, Megan? I need you to hear me out, she said, her voice a trembling whisper. I'm sorry, Ryan. For everything. For how I hurt you. For how I let Alex manipulate me. For not seeing what was right in front of me. Her eyes, filled with a desperate sincerity, met mine. I see it now. The lies, the games, the way he used my ambition against me. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. I was so blind. Her words were raw, unfiltered. And for the first time, I felt the last vestiges of my anger begin to dissolve, replaced not by love or forgiveness, but by a final, profound sense of pity. I appreciate your apology, Megan, I said, my voice softer now, my tone measured. But it doesn't change what happened. You made your choices, and those choices had consequences that we both have to live with. I don't want to lose you, she said, her voice breaking, the words a last, desperate plea. I looked at her, at the ghost of the woman I had loved, and I delivered the final, painful truth. You already did, I replied, my voice gentle but firm. Weeks ago, months ago, the moment you chose his world over ours. I took a deep breath. You need to start figuring out how to move forward without me. You need to find your own strength, the strength that was there long before Alex, long before me. She nodded slowly, wiping the tears from her face with a hand that was still shaking. I hope one day you can forgive me. I considered her words for a long moment. I already have, I said, and the words, when they came, surprised even me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. As she walked away from the doorstep, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a strange and definitive sense of closure. Her fall was heartbreaking to witness, but it was not my responsibility to save her. I had spent too long waiting for her to realize my worth. The irony was, in losing her, I had finally been forced to realize it for myself. She had her own path to walk now, a difficult, lonely road of rebuilding and self-discovery. And so did I. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready to move forward. Alone, but not broken. Scarred, but stronger than ever. The day the divorce was finalized felt like both an end and a beginning. Sitting in that sterile, wood-paneled office, signing my name on a document that legally dissolved a decade of my life, I felt a strange and potent mix of emotions. There was relief, a profound sense of a heavy weight being lifted. There was a lingering sadness, a quiet mourning for the life I thought I would have. And above all, there was a sense of freedom, a terrifying but exhilarating expanse of an unwritten future. Megan wasn't there. We had agreed, through our lawyers, to handle it separately. It was better that way. A final, clean cut. As I left the courthouse, the crisp autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like I could truly breathe again. The weight of uncertainty, of trying to fix something that was irreparably broken, was gone. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that it was mine to shape. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, intentional self-discovery. I dove back into hobbies I had long neglected, passions that had been buried under the weight of our shared life and Megan's all-consuming career. I dusted off my old DSLR camera, a relic from a past version of myself, and started waking up before dawn to capture the sun rising over the city skyline. I bought a new pair of hiking boots and began exploring the trails that snake through the mountains outside the city, finding a strange solace in the physical exertion and the quiet majesty of nature. I even, to Liam's unending amusement, started attempting to cook meals that didn't come from a box. Most were disasters, but the process itself, the simple act of creating something with my own hands, was a form of therapy. Liam was a constant, steady presence, always ready with a beer, a bad joke, or a blunt piece of advice to keep me grounded. My family, too, became a pillar of support. My niece, Emma, a whirlwind of creative energy, insisted on teaching me how to paint during one of her after-school art sessions. My attempts at a sunset looked more like a melted crayon disaster, but the sound of her uninhibited laughter was worth every botched canvas. Slowly, painfully, I started to feel like myself again. Or rather, I started to feel like a new version of myself. A man who had been through the fire and had come out the other side scarred. Yes, but also stronger, more resilient, and with a much clearer sense of who he was and what he wanted. One day, Liam, in his infinite wisdom, convinced me to join a local hiking group he had found online. "You need to meet new people, man," he said, practically dragging me out of the house. "And no, your work colleagues don't count." Reluctantly, I agreed. The group met at a nearby trailhead on a bright Saturday morning, a motley crew of casual walkers and seasoned hikers. It was there that I met Emily. She was tying her bootlaces when I arrived, her fiery auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a smudge of dirt already on her cheek, and a warm, welcoming smile on her face. "You're new," she said, her voice easy and friendly. "Yeah," I replied, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "First time out with the group." "Well, welcome," she said, her green eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm Emily. Stick with me, and I'll make sure you don't get lost." Her humor was disarming, and as we began the hike, our conversation flowed with a natural, unforced ease. Emily was a high school science teacher, passionate about nature, bad puns, and finding joy in the simple, uncomplicated things. She spoke about her students with a light in her eyes that reminded me of what it felt like to be truly, deeply passionate about something. By the end of the hike, as we stood at the summit, looking out at the panoramic view of the valley below, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A spark. Not the overwhelming, world-tilting fire I had known with Megan, but something quieter, steadier. A gentle, warming ember. It was a feeling of possibility. As I drove home that evening, I found myself smiling for no reason. Emily wasn't a cure for my pain or a solution to my problems. She was simply a reminder. A reminder that life goes on. A reminder that new connections can still be made, even after the most devastating heartbreak. A reminder that the world is still full of good, kind, interesting people. Sitting on my small apartment balcony that night, looking up at the stars, I reflected on how far I had come. The betrayal, the anger, the grief, it had all shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger, more self-aware, and, for the first time in a very long time, I was genuinely ready to embrace whatever came next. The scars of the past would always be there, faint, silvery lines on the map of my life, a reminder of the treacherous terrain I had navigated. But they no longer felt like a burden. They were part of my story. A story that was, I realized with a sudden, quiet thrill, still being written. And I was finally ready to turn the page.